He expected reports of victory, not the quiet language of collapse. The evening shadows stretched across the frozen forests of East Prussia as Adolf Hitler moved slowly through the reinforced corridors of the Wolf's lair. Outside, snow blanketed the bunkers and barbed wire of Germany's most secret headquarters. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, tension, and the unmistakable scent of strategic failure. Spread across the map table were the latest field reports from the Ardennes. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the offensive Hitler believed would split the Allied front, recapture Antwerp, and force the Western powers into negotiation, was unraveling. American resistance had hardened. Panzer spearheads were stalling. Fuel reserves were vanishing faster than expected, and the weather, the one advantage Hitler had counted on, was beginning to clear. But what unsettled him most was not the tactical failure. It was what the reports revealed about the enemy he had spent years underestimating. For Adolf Hitler had never truly believed the United States was a real military threat. From the beginning, his view of America had been shaped not by intelligence, but by ideology. He saw the United States as racially mixed, politically divided, softened by consumerism, corrupted by capitalism, a nation incapable of discipline or sacrifice. In his mind, America lacked the cohesion required for total war. He believed democracies were weak. He believed industrial workers without authoritarian control would never outproduce Germany. He believed racial hierarchy translated directly into battlefield superiority. And so, when German intelligence began reporting the scale of American mobilization after 1941, Hitler dismissed it. They told him the United States was training millions of soldiers across vast military camps. He called it exaggeration. They reported American factories producing aircraft in numbers exceeding anything Germany had achieved. He called it propaganda. They presented data showing U.S. shipyards launching vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. He rejected the mathematics entirely. To Hitler, such production was impossible. Germany's war economy, optimized, militarized, and centrally controlled, represented, in his mind, the peak of industrial efficiency. No democracy, he insisted, could match it. But some of his own generals saw the danger early. General Franz Halder, chief of the Army General Staff, compiled detailed economic comparisons. His analysts measured steel output, petroleum access, electrical generation, machine tool capacity, the industrial lifeblood of mechanized warfare. The numbers were devastating. American steel production dwarfed Germany's. Its oil reserves were virtually inexhaustible by comparison. Its electrical grid-powered factories on scales Germany could not replicate even theoretically. Halder warned that a prolonged war against the United States was strategically unwinnable. Regardless of German tactical brilliance, Hitler's response was fury. He accused Halder of defeatism. Then he removed him. Reports that contradicted ideology were no longer welcome in the wolf's lair. Reality itself became filtered through belief, and still the warnings continued. By 1942 and 1943, intelligence summaries described an industrial avalanche forming across the Atlantic, assembly lines producing tanks, bombers, trucks, ammunition, not in thousands, but in tens of thousands. A mechanized force was being built not for a campaign, but for global war. Yet Hitler remained convinced that material alone did not win conflicts. He believed German willpower, leadership, and tactical genius would compensate for any industrial disparity. It was a gamble rooted in ideology, not logistics. And now, in December 1944, the consequences of that gamble lay scattered across the snowbound forests of the Ardennes. Because the reports arriving that night told a different story than the one he had believed for years. They described American armies that did not collapse under surprise. American logistics that moved reinforcements with astonishing speed. American engineers that reopened roads, bridges, and supply lines faster than German planners thought possible. This was no fragile democracy, breaking under pressure. This was an industrial war machine absorbing shock and preparing to strike back for the first time. Beneath the dim bunker lights of the wolf's lair, Adolf Hitler was no longer confronting the America he had imagined. He was confronting the America that actually existed, and the realization had begun. Too late to change the war, but early enough to haunt its final months. The first time German forces truly tested American soldiers in battle. It seemed to confirm everything Hitler believed. February 1943. The Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Jagged mountain ridges cut through the North African desert as inexperienced U.S. Army units moved into position. Many were fresh from training camps, their officers new to combat, their coordination untested under fire. Watching from concealed observation posts, veteran German commanders prepared their assault. Then the panzers came. Columns of German armor surged through the narrow pass. Panzer IVs and Tigers grinding forward behind curtains of artillery fire. Stuka dive bombers screamed down from the sky, sirens wailing as bombs tore into American positions. Machine gun tracers stitched across defensive lines as U.S. units struggled to respond. Communications faltered, defensive cohesion broke. Entire formations withdrew in disorder under the sudden, concentrated violence of German blitzkrieg tactics. For Berlin's propaganda ministry, Kasserine was a gift. Reports of American retreats were broadcast as proof that the United States lacked the discipline and battlefield skill to face German veterans. Hitler seized upon the victory as vindication of his ideological convictions. To him, this was the real America, materially equipped, but psychologically fragile. But the commanders who fought there saw something Hitler did not. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel studied captured equipment, interrogated prisoners, and reviewed battlefield performance. Yes, the Americans had been inexperienced. Yes, their command structure had faltered under pressure. But what unsettled him was how quickly they adapted. Even during the battle itself, American artillery, once properly directed, unleashed overwhelming barrages. Their supply lines, even when disrupted, re-established flow with startling efficiency. Fresh units arrived not piecemeal, but organized, mechanized, reinforced, and better prepared. Rommel reported back to Berlin with cautious respect. He warned that American forces were not inherently weak, merely untested. Given time, experience, and industrial backing, they would become formidable. His assessment received a cold reception. Hitler dismissed such caution as the pessimism of a commander frustrated by logistics and terrain. Yet the transformation was already underway. In the months following Kasserine, American command structures were reorganized, training intensified, tactical doctrines were rewritten based on battlefield lessons learned in blood. When U.S. forces re-engaged German units later in the Tunisia campaign, the difference was immediate. Artillery coordination became precise and relentless. Air-ground communication improved dramatically. Armored units maneuvered with growing confidence. And most critically, American logistics began to dominate the battlefield. Where German units rationed fuel and ammunition, American forces fought with abundance. Trucks delivered shells, rations, spare parts, an endless conveyor belt of industrial support stretching back across the Atlantic. German officers began noting a troubling pattern. Even when tactically outmaneuvered, American units returned stronger days later, reinforced, resupplied, reorganized. They were learning faster than Germany could exploit their mistakes. By the time Axis forces collapsed in North Africa, many German field commanders had reached a sobering conclusion. The United States was not fighting a campaign. It was building momentum. And momentum, backed by industry, was far more dangerous than raw tactical skill. Rommel's later reports emphasized American artillery as among the most devastating he had encountered. Their air support, once sporadic, was becoming constant. Fighter bombers roamed battlefields, striking armor, supply columns, and defensive strong points with growing precision. To seasoned German veterans, it felt as if the Americans were turning industrial output directly into battlefield firepower. Still, inside Hitler's headquarters, ideology dulled the warning signs. He continued to believe that superior leadership and German resolve would offset American growth. But on battlefields stretching from Tunisia to Sicily, a different reality was emerging. American soldiers who had fled under fire at Kasserine were now advancing under it. American officers who had hesitated were now coordinating artillery, armor, and air power with lethal efficiency. And American factories, far beyond the horizon, were ensuring that every loss was temporary. Germany, by contrast, was fighting a finite war with finite resources. The United States was fighting with a production line that never slept. Kasserine Pass had begun as proof of American weakness. Instead, it became the opening chapter in Germany's awakening, an awakening that would grow louder with every bomber formation over Europe and every landing. Craft approaching occupied shores. At first, they heard them before they saw them. A distant, growing thunder rolling across the German sky, not weather, but engines. By 1943, the illusion of American weakness was no longer collapsing at the front lines alone. It was collapsing over the heart of the Reich itself. High above the clouds, in tight geometric formations, waves of American heavy bombers pushed deep into German airspace. B-17 flying fortresses, B-20 for liberators, hundreds at a time, sometimes more. Their aluminum fuselages glinted in the sunlight as defensive gun turrets scanned the horizon. Inside the bomb bays, thousands of pounds of high explosives waited for release, and surrounding them, like steel, guardians flew long-range escort fighters that changed the air war forever, P-51 Mustangs. With the range to fly from England to Berlin and back, Luftwaffe pilots scrambled desperately to intercept. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s clawed into the sky. Climbing toward the incoming formations, anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, filling the air with black flak bursts that rocked bomber wings and shattered glass noses. But the formations held. Defensive machine guns stitched the sky with tracers. Escort fighters dove on German interceptors with aggressive precision. For every bomber lost, more pressed forward, factories burned. Rail hubs collapsed, oil refineries erupted in pillars of flame visible for miles. The scale of destruction was unlike anything Germany had prepared for. This was not harassment bombing. This was industrial warfare from the air. And it was relentless. German production lines, already strained, now operated under constant threat. Repair crews worked around the clock, only for new raids to undo their progress within days. The message was unmistakable. America could reach the Reich at will. But the full demonstration of American superpower capability came not from the sky. It came from the sea. June 6, 1944. Normandy. Before dawn. The English Channel was no longer water. It was steel. Thousands of ships stretched from horizon to horizon. Battleships, destroyers, troop transports, landing craft, an armada so vast that German radar operators initially believed their instruments were malfunctioning. Then the naval bombardment began. Battleship guns thundered, launching massive shells into coastal defenses. Bunkers shattered. Artillery nests vanished under explosions that shook the cliffs themselves. And through the smoke came the landing craft at Utah and Omaha beaches. American troops surged toward the shore under machine gun fire and mortar blasts. Higgins' boat slammed into sandbars as rams dropped into chaos. Soldiers wading through surf stained red by tracer fire. Explosions ripped through obstacles. Engineers blew gaps in barbed wire. Medics dragged wounded men through incoming rounds. At Omaha, entire waves were cut down before reaching cover. But more kept coming. Because behind the assault was something Germany could not match. An ocean of logistics. Artificial harbors were towed across the channel. Fuel pipelines were laid beneath the sea. Supply ships delivered tanks, trucks, ammunition, food, an uninterrupted flow of war material. Within days, the beaches became ports. Within weeks, they became supply empires. German commanders quickly realized the truth. This invasion was not a raid. It was the opening of a permanent Western front powered by American industry. Then came the breakout, July 1944, Operation Cobra. After weeks of attritional fighting in Normandy's hedgerows, American bombers carpet-bombed German defensive lines. When the smoke cleared, U.S. armored divisions surged through the breach, among them General George Patton's Third Army. His forces moved with astonishing speed. Sherman tanks and mechanized infantry advanced across France like a steel tide, bypassing strong points, encircling German units, and collapsing defensive lines before they could stabilize. Fuel trucks raced to keep pace. Mobile repair units fixed damaged armor on the move. Air support roamed overhead, striking retreating columns. German intelligence officers studying Patton's advance reported something deeply unsettling. This was maneuver warfare at a level equal to, and sometimes exceeding, Germany's own blitzkrieg campaigns of 1940. The Americans were no longer learning. They had mastered it. Paris was liberated. German forces retreated toward their own borders, and with every mile gained, the industrial engine behind the U.S. Army pushed forward, inexhaustible, mechanized, unstoppable. From the bombing of the right, to the beaches of Normandy, to the racing columns across France, the evidence was now undeniable. America was not just participating in the war, it was overpowering it. Yet Hitler still believed one decisive blow could shatter this rising superpower. One massive offensive, one final gamble. And so, in the winter of 1944, he prepared to strike west one last time, convinced that American strength, no matter how vast, could still be broken on the battlefield. Hitler believed the coming offensive would rewrite reality itself. December 16, 1944, before dawn, the Ardennes forest lay silent beneath deep winter fog. Snow choked the narrow roads. Visibility was near zero. It was perfect weather for surprise, the kind of conditions German commanders had exploited since the opening days of the war. Then the artillery began. Thousands of German guns erupted simultaneously, their flashes lighting the frozen tree line as shells screamed into American positions. Forward outposts were obliterated in minutes. Telephone lines snapped. Command posts vanished under explosions, and through the smoke came the armor. Panzer divisions surged westward. Panthers, Panzer-IVs, Tiger tanks, grinding through the forest corridors with infantry riding their hulls. The assault smashed into thinly held American sectors, exploiting gaps between units. Some U.S. formations were overrun before they could organize. Defensive fuel depots burned. Convoys were ambushed. Road junctions fell in rapid succession. To Hitler, the first report sounded like vindication. The offensive, like am Rhine, was working. He envisioned a light line splitting apart, British and American forces separated, Antwerp recaptured, negotiations forced. But what unfolded next was not collapse. It was resistance. American units, though shocked, began regrouping with remarkable speed. Engineers rerouted traffic through frozen backroads. Military police redirected entire divisions toward the breakthrough zone. Reinforcements moved day and night, and at the center of the German advance lay a small Belgian town whose road network controlled the entire region, Bastogne. When German armor encircled the town, they believed its fall was inevitable. Inside were elements of the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, paratroopers, many without winter gear, low on ammunition. Surrounded on all sides, German commanders sent a surrender demand. The reply from Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe was a single word: nuts. Then the siege began. German artillery pounded the perimeter relentlessly. Infantry probes tested the defensive ring. Tanks pushed toward the road junction from multiple directions. But the Americans held. Artillery units, though encircled, fired with devastating accuracy. Ammunition was rationed carefully. Medics treated wounded in freezing aid stations lit by lanterns. Supply aircraft began dropping crates through flak and fog. Ammunition, plasma, food. Every road into Bastogne became a battlefield. German units reported fierce resistance. Disciplined, coordinated, unyielding. The defenders did not break. They did not surrender. They absorbed the assault. Then the weather changed. The clouds cleared, and with them became American air power. Fighter bombers roared overhead, diving onto German armor trapped on narrow forest roads. Rockets slammed into tank columns. Napalm engulfed supply trucks. Strafing runs turned retreat routes into infernos. What had begun as a surprise offensive now faced relentless aerial destruction. And then came the maneuver that stunned German command most of all. General George Patton, his Third Army, engaged far to the south, received orders to pivot north and relieve Bastogne. Within 72 hours, in brutal winter conditions, Patton disengaged, turned his entire army 90 degrees, and launched a counterattack into the German flank. It was an operational feat German planners had believed impossible under such conditions. Columns of American armor smashed into exposed panzer units already strained by fuel shortages. In their attack, the German advance stalled, then it buckled. By early January, the Bulge and Allied lines began collapsing inward under sustained counteroffensives. German reserves, already scarce, were exhausted trying to hold ground they could not supply. The offensive that was meant to break American power had instead revealed its full maturity. Operational flexibility, logistical dominance, air superiority, battlefield resilience. Germany had gambled its last strategic reserves and lost them. And as the shattered remnants of panzer divisions retreated eastward through the snow, the realization began spreading through German high command. If this was America on the defensive, what would happen when it returned to the offensive on Germany's own soil? By March 1945, the war was no longer being fought for victory. It was being fought for time. American armies now stood at the edge of Germany's last natural defensive barrier, the Rhine River. For centuries, it had shielded the German heartland from invasion. Military planners believed any crossing would require prolonged preparation, massive casualties, and weeks, perhaps months, of delay. But the war Germany was now facing did not move at the pace of history. It moved at the pace of American logistics. On March 7th, forward elements of the U.S. Army reached the town of Remagen. There, spanning the Rhine, stood the Ludendorff Bridge, still intact. German engineers had wired it for demolition, but confusion, damaged detonators, and the speed of the American advance delayed the blast. U.S. infantry didn't wait. Under machine gun fire and sporadic artillery, they rushed the bridge. Engineers sprinted beside them, cutting wires, diffusing charges as bullets snapped across the steel framework. When the smoke cleared, the bridge was in American hands. Within hours, armored units began crossing. Pontoon bridges followed, then entire divisions. What German planners believed would be the final defensive stand had been breached in a single, audacious thrust. Further north, British forces launched massive set-piece crossings supported by overwhelming artillery and air power. To the south, Patton's Third Army forced its own crossings with relentless speed. The Rhine, Germany's shield, had fallen, and with it, any remaining illusion that the right could halt the Allied advance. Inside command bunkers, senior German officers attempted to convey the reality of the situation. General Heinz Guderian argued that the combined pressure of American forces from the west and Soviet armies from the east made defeat inevitable. He urged negotiations, any settlement that might preserve what remained of Germany. Hitler's response was rage. He dismissed Guderian as defeatist, then dismissed him from command. Reality was no longer a factor in decision-making. Orders continued flowing to divisions that no longer existed. Counterattacks were demanded from units without fuel, ammunition, or manpower. On situation maps, phantom armies maneuvered in ink while real armies disintegrated in the field. And beyond the collapsing front lines, the scale of American power continued expanding. U.S. factories still produced aircraft, tanks, trucks, and ammunition in numbers Germany could no longer comprehend. Lend-Lease shipments fueled Soviet offensives from the east. American trucks carrying Red Army infantry, American fuel powering Soviet armor, simultaneously. Across the Pacific, U.S. forces advanced island by island toward Japan, fighting an entirely separate industrial war, while still crushing Germany. No nation in history had ever waged global war on such scaled into hemispheres. Without economic collapse, it was the definition of superpower. By April 1945, American and Soviet forces were carving Germany apart from opposite directions. Cities fell daily. Supply networks disintegrated. Civilian infrastructure collapsed under bombing and ground assault alike. And beneath the ruins of Berlin, Adolf Hitler retreated into the Fuhrer bunker. There, surrounded by concrete walls and fading maps, he received the final reports. American armies advancing from the west, Soviet armies storming from the east, German forces, unable to halt either. The industrial titan he had dismissed as racially weak now stood deep. Inside the right, even then, ideology clung to him. He blamed betrayal, he blamed generals, he blamed fate. But the strategic truth was unavoidable. His declaration of war against the United States in December 1941 had brought into the conflict an enemy whose industrial capacity, technological innovation, and logistical reach exceeded anything Germany could defeat. The thousand-year Reich he had promised had lasted 12, destroyed not only by battlefield losses, but by catastrophic miscalculation. America had not simply joined the war, it had transformed it. From the frozen forests of the Ardennes, to the shattered bridges of the Rhine, to the burning skies over Berlin, the realization came too late to change history, but clear enough to define it. Germany had gambled against a superpower and lost everything.